Hi, and welcome to the Art, Culture and Ideas podcast. My name is Elio Sancholo, and welcome to my studio. Today, we're going to be talking about some ideas. This podcast is about art, culture, and ideas. We're going to be focusing on the ideas portion of our mission, and particularly, we're going to be looking at philosophy, the philosophy of Plato. In future programs, we'll be looking at the philosophy of Aristotle and Immanuel Kant. We'll be looking at the nature of beauty and all that sort of thing. But today we're going to be going way back into ancient Greece, and we're going to be looking at the fundamental ideas that started the whole process rolling about formally writing and thinking about art. Okay, so as I just mentioned, Plato was an ancient Greek philosopher. He lived in Athens between 428 and 348 during what is commonly known or categorized as the classical period. And this was an incredible period of intellectual flourishing and artistic flourishing in Athens. He had a beautiful metaphor for this picture of the mind, which he created. And he imagined a charioteer on a chariot. The chariot's drawn by two horses, and each horse represents either the emotional part of the mind, or the appetitive part, or the urges. And the charioteer himself represents reason, and the job of the charioteer is to steer these two and to be able to control these two so that the chariot goes in the right direction. The chariot being the person. Okay, so this is the picture that Plato created to help explain his theory of the mind, and it's a beautiful metaphor in which to start because all his thinking is very coherent. His theory of the mind, his theory of society, which we'll get onto next, and his theory of art, they're all interconnected. And that's what makes Plato very interesting to look at, because Plato had this concept that this world that we see around us is an inferior copy of a world, or a projection of a world, of a perfect world which exists in another dimension. Now, you can't visit this other world, you can't visit this other dimension, but you can think it. Remember, he's a thinker. So you can think of this higher dimension. And this dimension contains all the objects we see around us, okay, but the perfect version of it. Okay, in a sense, everything that we see of a type that we see in this world, say, take the example of a table. For all the different shaped tables that there are in the world, all those tables are the expression of a perfect idea of what constitutes a table. And this idea exists in the world of perfect forms. The same could be said for buildings, for people, for plants. Everything in this higher dimension, which was the world of perfect forms, okay, according to Plato, was a perfect expression of what we see around us. Now, the other thing about this perfect existence, this perfect dimension, was that anything that exists within that world is incorruptible. It exists in perfection forever. These things, these are primal thoughts thought by God at the beginning of time, and they are immutable. They don't change. The reality that we find ourselves in, however, in this world is quite different. Everything is corruptible. Matter falls apart over time. Fruit rots away. We die. Our bodies decompose. Okay, everything changes and it's corruptible and falls apart. Okay, but in the world of perfect forms, nothing changes. There is perfection for eternity because they are perfect thoughts. Okay, so this world that we currently live in is faulty. This world, in a sense, bears the same relationship to the world of perfect forms that a shadow does to a body. So in a sense, this world is a world of shadows. We dimly see an aspect of reality, but only in rough outline, in rough silhouettes. We don't truly see the reality that it's connected to, because we can't inhabit this world of perfect forms. It exists beyond our ability to perceive it. So we're sort of stuck in this corruptible universe. Okay, experiences like the execution of Socrates really consolidated in Plato the idea that most people who aren't philosophers don't have the tools to rule properly. So he wanted somebody at the top of the hierarchy in society to have the capacity to exert authority and had also the capacity to think, and to think clearly in such a way that they will be able to control both their appetites and their emotions. And the only type of person that he could think of that could fulfill this particular role was a philosopher king. A king has total authority, and if he's a philosopher, whatever decision he ends up making will benefit everybody else, because that person knows more. So it's like the perfect dictator in a sense. That's what he wanted. So his society consisted of the philosopher king at the top. It consisted, the next tier down consisted of the guardians, or who we would term to be the military, the police. Okay, they would keep order. Below the police or the military, you had the common folk, which were artisans, craftsmen, farmers, shopkeepers, cobblers, anybody who made things that were useful, that could be traded, that drove the economy. So those people were the main people. And below everyone else, right at the bottom of society, you guessed it, that was the domain of the artists. Now, if Plato could, he would eliminate artists totally from society, which is really strange for us living in the modern times, where we tend to value art. But for Plato, artists, and by artists he meant anybody who made things through their imagination. Painters, sculptors, poets in particular. He despised poets. Okay, all these people were on the outer for Plato. He just did not want them as part of his perfect society, because it stands to reason, if you think back to his world of perfect forms, if this world is a mere projection of this greater reality, this true reality, okay, and it's corruptible, what do artists do? Well, artists in Plato's time, their main job was to imitate what they saw. And so, in a sense, what artists were providing people were misguided views or information about reality. It's almost like the artists are creating a photocopy of a photocopy. It's two steps removed from the true reality, which now Plato's ideas were contrasted very strongly by his student Aristotle. Aristotle was a student of Plato, and Plato's ideas are very, how would you say, they're very rigid in one sense. You know, he's got all these structures that contain things very neatly in these little packets that are all related to each other. Aristotle, I think, took a much more open view of art, and we'll get into what Aristotle thought about art next time we meet. But I'll just leave you with this particular little idea. Plato was, how would you put this now in modern terms? Plato's ideas were very influential throughout history in a whole lot of different ways. The ideas of this perfect world, that exists beyond the reality that we're in a way mirrors closely the Judeo-Christian concept of heaven and earth, of body and soul. Yeah, these two opposites, or one thing connected to the other, but that one's inferior to the other because of its position in relation to it. And so the early church back in the day, and remember, Plato was a pagan. This was before Christ, 300 years or so before Christ. So the early church adopted some Platonic ideas. It wasn't until 800 years after Plato that the people like St. Augustine, who was a famous doctor of the church, of the Catholic Church, used some of Plato's ideas in his writings about the perfect society and the city of God. He said, we'll talk about that later on, but there's a whole lot of ways in which Plato's thought has filtered down through history to this very day, and in particular, even to the art of the present day. There's a stream of art in the present day which is commonly referred to as conceptual art, that puts the idea above the object. Okay, so the idea is the main focus point of the artwork, not the object necessarily itself, or the object or the particular product, the artistic product, call it that way. And this can be traced directly back to Plato's attitude towards, to the value of ideas above other things. So that's just an interesting aside. Anyway, I hope to see you next time. We're going to be discussing Aristotle, as I just said. Please join me next time and on art, culture, and ideas. And I'll see you then.